Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Courageous Pivot podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Telpner, and I am beyond excited to share my very first guest of the podcast with you. Angela de la Agua and I have a long history of friendship. I talk a little bit about it with her when we first get started. But for those of you who can see me, if you're watching the video, I'm wearing a caftan, a beautiful, to my eyes, my husband's not a fan, vintage Turkish 100% cotton caftan. And the story about this caftan is that back in 2015, we rented this geodesic dome in the desert that was like Instagram perfect, not why we rented it, but it came with these caftans. And this was also where we were when we first met Angela. And so I associate this caftan with my time in Joshua Tree, which is a place I love and which is where my dear friend Angela lives. We had so many synchronicities and alignments as she was telling her story. I didn't share all of the overlap and coincidence in timing and things like that. It was a really blessed opportunity to get to talk to her. Often our visits are a bit short. There's usually a child running around and other people there and that sort of thing. Her story is even more inspiring than I had anticipated. And also, she touches on so many aspects of what I'm exploring with the Courageous Pivot. And her story is such a beautiful, wild example of what can happen when you do follow your heart. So her official bio goes like this. Angela de la Agua is an initiated priestess in service to helping others access the divinity within each of us through heart, opening healing work, ceremony, photography, and spiritual practice. She has been rooted full-time in Joshua Tree, California since 2011 as a devoted initiate of the desert, where she embodies her role as a priestess through work as a ceremonialist, spiritual teacher, and divine healer. She is renowned for her work with sacred nourishment, fasting, yogic practice, ceremonial cacao, as well as an artist and photographer. Her ability to find beauty in all things enables Angela to recognize the divinity that dwells within everything and elevate the mundane to the sacred in every day. She continues to follow the path of the open heart as her sacred work continues to evolve and expand. Her radiant energy reaches people around the world who seek spiritual guidance, soul-level healing, and embodied self-love. And she is and does all of those things. She truly is, as she comes across in this podcast interview. She's joyful, loving, warm, and has a great, beautiful sense of humor about all of it, about who she is, who she's becoming. And I really thoroughly, genuinely enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Hello, Angela. Welcome to the Courageous Pivot podcast.
Hello, Megan. So happy to be here. So honored to be here.
You are my first official guest. When
Amazing.
I was last with you, we were in our swimwear celebrating your birthday in a hot spring in the middle of the Joshua Tree Desert.
Yes, that is correct.
And I just want to share the context because I knew, I'm wearing my favorite caftan in your honor.
Oh, beautiful.
Because you are a model of ceremonial gowns and many things. And I just wanted to share that we first met, and I don't know if you would remember, but it was very special to me. Josh and I had rented a geodesic dome in the desert, and there was a little card that was like, if you want to order juices, call Angela. And then you showed up like the desert maven in your own beautiful caftan with a basket of juices where you'd carefully penciled in the ingredients on the lid of each one. And it was like the most majestic, silky juice I'd ever experienced in my life. And I was like, who is this sorceress? Like, who is this person? And how do I be her friend? And since we've come back year after year after year, we've become friends. And I've gotten to know you more and your story and how you ended up as a high priestess of the desert. And that's why I invited you to chat today, because it's a remarkable story. So welcome.
Thank you so much. My goodness. I mean, how long ago was that?
It was 9 years ago. It was in 2015.
Incredible.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely remember that.
Amazing. amazing. Um,
Yeah.
so you were not, let's just start at how you landed in the desert, because the theme of this show is pivots, unexpected ones, the messy process, and kind of landing on the other side where you are able to be in a place where you live by the guidance of your heart. And I feel like you embody that in totality, or at least from what I know of you. So, how did you end up living in a 2-bedroom cabin alone in the California desert?
Well, one bedroom, actually, a one bedroom little homestead cabin out in the middle of nowhere. Indeed, it's probably my favorite story to talk about because it's the most significant story of my journey, because it was truly the moment of pivoting, of making a radical life choice in a way that I never had before. And so up until that point, I had been living what I just call a very ordinary, mundane reality. I was part of the matrix, just which I guess can mean just like the typical expected way that people navigate this reality, having a 9 to 5 job, working for other people, working for a company, I was living in LA at the time, and I've always lived in Southern California, and I lived for 4 years in LA, and I never really wanted to be there, but it was that in of itself was a testament to me not living in my truth. I moved to LA because everyone else was living in LA. All my friends moved to LA, and I was just like, well, I don't really want to be there, but this is what people do, I guess. And so I was living in LA during this time frame, and in my late 20s, I went through my Saturn return. And so anyone who knows what that is understands that this is a very significant rite of passage, where basically around the age of 28 or so, if you are not on your path and you are not in alignment with the work that you're here to do, your life is going to fall apart. That's what the Saturn return is. I was not living in my truth. I was not on my path. And I was in a place of having no idea who I was, what it was I was here to do, what my purpose was. And so, of course, my life indeed fell apart. And I was getting laid off of my job for like the third time, second or third time. I was getting these messages over years of things not being in alignment, and I just insisted on, trying to live life in this expected kind of way, and I would always show up at these jobs and these positions very strongly. I was always really good at whatever it was being asked of me, but because it wasn't my soul work, because it was completely out of alignment for like what it was I'm here to do, I would eventually, my soul would suffer in those positions. And so eventually my performance would, not be as great anymore. And so ultimately, like, these layoffs were a serious pattern. And then, being in a relationship that was not in alignment, that fell apart. So many things. And it was my first genuine experience of a dark night of the soul. And, we need these experiences to wake us up. And I'm so grateful for that very difficult time. It was kind of like the time of greatest heartbreak that I'd known. And it was the darkest time that I had experienced. And so as a result of that initiation, I started looking at patterns. I started noticing the patterns. Well, I'm all upset that I got laid off of this job, but I didn't even want to be there. I wasn't happy there. Why am I upset about this? And why is this like the third time that I'm being laid off of a job that I didn't like, and then I'm upset about it? And this relationship that I'm totally heartbroken over, this is a pattern. This is a pattern. And I'm victimizing myself in all of these circumstances. And so I am so grateful. I am so grateful that there was something in me, just a little spark of truth within me that was able to identify patterns. And I was starting to take responsibility for choices that I had made for the first time in my life, and started recognizing I am victimizing myself and realizing this is so disempowering, and that it was time for me to take responsibility for choices that I had made, and to not point, fingers at other people, and this was a big shift in of itself, just to wake up to that detail. And this truly was the beginning of my journey of awakening, was this process of just beginning to wake up to truth and beginning to notice things in my life and starting to pay attention to my interior landscape in a way that I never really had before, honestly. And so this was basically like, this was what 4 years in LA was me going through this process. And the last year I was in LA, I was introduced to Joshua Tree by some friends. And so I was in this place of this very gradual process of waking up. And I felt this opening, this sense of like, wow, when a person starts waking up, there's this sense of like, I've missed life.
Mm-hmm.
I like this readiness to experience life in a new way. And so I was just ready for anything, like any invitation for some kind of new experience or exploration. I was just like, yes, yes, yes. And especially things that were nature related, because I was really starting to develop a relationship to nature in LA, which is such a gift of a place to be because there's so much extraordinary nature tucked within the city. And so I was living there, making that's how I lived in my time there, was to go to Griffith Park, to go on these hiking, excursions very regularly, because that's kind of how I managed to stay there without knowing at that time that I needed the nature so much more than I even realized. But basically, I was invited to this, just simply a day trip to Joshua Tree National Park with some friends. So we were there for just a day, for a short amount of time, really. But I'd never been there before. And it's just a few hours away from any place I'd ever lived my whole life, but I'd never been to the desert, really. And I also never felt a pull to the desert because I love water, and I've always lived near some body of water, the ocean or something like that. But I was just like, let's go. And as soon as we made it into Joshua Tree, it was not even making it into the magnificence that is the national park. We were just simply driving through downtown Joshua Tree, which this was a long time ago. This was like 15, 16 years ago. And if anybody knows Joshua Tree now, it is not the Joshua Tree it is now. It was a very different story. It was very quiet, very sleepy little energy of, like nothing happening here, but had charm, and there's something about it where as soon as we just drove through the town, I just had this thought pop into my mind, like, what would it be like to live here? And that was it. It was just like a thought that dropped in, and then we made our way into the national park, and then suddenly there I am exploring these extraordinary boulders, these beautiful, magnificent boulders, and this extraordinary sunset. And it felt like I was on another planet. And after that, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this was real, that it was here, and that I had access to coming to it. And so after that, I couldn't stop thinking about the desert. I couldn't stop thinking about Joshua Tree. And basically for the next 8 months, I would say, I was just kind of on this back and forth journey of knowing that pull, like I want to be there, but I live my life here kind of thing, and not really seeing the next step quite yet. So it was this experience of just going to Joshua Tree as often as I could, which was not very often, but I would take these weekend trips here and there. It was never enough time. And yet I was so happy. I was in such bliss when I was in Joshua Tree with the boulders in the national park. It was really about exploring the national park. And so, it came to a point of realizing that, I was increasingly becoming more depressed when I'd have to go back to the city after being in Joshua Tree. And I was also like, this is an important aspect too, is that I was also doing all of these trips by myself. And that was completely brand new. I had never it never even occurred to me that I could take a trip by myself before Joshua Tree. And so I was really stepping into my own authority, my own power in these ways, and starting to really just listen only to like what it was that my heart was asking, not caring about how it affects other people or if other people can go too. This was really major for me. And I had really lived my whole life caring so much about what other people thought of me and making choices in my life based on what I thought other people wanted of me. So this was the big sign that something massive was shifting in me. And so basically 8 months into that kind of back and forth, like, get there as often as I could kind of thing, there was a point where I was at the end of a weekend trip in Joshua Tree, and I was in the national park, and I was sitting on this incredible boulder, and I was watching the sunset. And it was so beautiful, and I felt so much peace and so much joy. And yet I also felt so incredibly depressed because I knew that this was the end of the trip. And in a matter of moments, I'm going to have to get off this boulder. I'm going to have to get in my car, and I'm going to have to drive back to LA and continue that life. And there was just something in the stars in that moment, who can say, but I was witnessing myself in this and realized, if I am so depressed at the thought of going to LA, and I'm so in peace and in bliss here on this boulder, why don't I just stay on this boulder? And it was this moment of it was an epiphany, an awakening moment of realizing that I could change my life, and that I could make this radical choice to choose the life that my heart was guiding me into. And ultimately I did get off the boulder and drive back to LA because I had to, but it was like with a whole different intention and mindset, and this thrill of aliveness, just like, oh my goodness. And just this knowing, like, this is what I'm going to do. And within 2 months from that moment, I was living in Joshua Tree. And needless to say, I'd never done anything like that before in my life. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah. We are taking a brief little pause here because I want to share with you a course I created just for you and just for the courageous pivot process. It is called Rise and Shine, a guided approach to heart-led living and leadership. In this course, I go through a very simple strategy, practical tool to help you learn how to tune into your heart, but not just tune into your heart, how to learn to trust the guidance that you receive. This is about understanding the local intuition, the recognition, remembering what it is you already know, and being able to continually build on the evidence to trust the guidepost that is within each and every one of us. I want you to head over to courageouspivot.com. You can scroll down there and you'll find a link to the course Rise and Shine along with a 30% discount. The course is built to take you about 4 weeks to go through. There's 5, 10, and 15-minute meditations included with it. There are beautifully designed slides to go with the presentation material. There's audio-only options for the course. You can listen while you're folding laundry or going for a walk in the park or painting a picture or crocheting a sweater or baking cookies. For me, maybe even. Who knows? I've received cookies in the mail before. Rise and Shine is a wonderful bridge to bring you into this work in a way that is really, really accessible and profoundly powerful and effective. Head over to courageouspivot.com, scroll down, you'll see the link to Rise and Shine. There's a little trailer video that tells you all about it. Register and get instant access and get started today. Your life is waiting, and let me tell you, what is on the other side of the path of the heart is love and joy and freedom like you've never experienced before. There's so much I want to follow up on. I just want to point out something because it's something I've already talked about on one of my solo episodes, but the idea that when you're following the call of your heart, it can feel crazy in your mind, like insane and stressful when you think about it, but in your body, it feels undeniably right and peaceful. It's like this full body knowing that the heart wisdom, even when we can't logically make sense of it, and you experience that completely.
Indeed. 100%. That's what that was. And it felt to me like the first time in my life, at this point I was 30.
Yeah.
And so it's the first time in my life where I felt like I had that experience and I just launched into it and I trusted it.
Yes.
And it was the first time I was aware that I was following my heart. And I
Yes.
knew that at the time, like this is a heart-led decision. And it was so big and so profound because maybe because it was the first time, but also because that choice was going to redefine my whole life
Right.
more than I had any capacity to know at that time. But I think because of all of that, it was so big that the mind really didn't resist anything.
Hmm.
It was more like the people around me who were just like, what are you doing? And, some judgment, some support, but, even my dad was just like, this is really stupid. There's no jobs in Joshua Tree. Like, what are you doing?
Yes.
And so just to trust that, in that time frame was a trust like I'd never known before.
I mean, we've known each other a long time. I didn't realize how many parallels there were. I was also 28 when I woke up the first time.
Wow.
And I had gone, my body had imploded. I was quite sick, and I'd come to LA to see a Chinese medicine practitioner. And that was when I started going to yoga and meditating and taking walks on the beach and being alone basically for the first time in
Mm.
my life, to the point where I'd go to my acupuncture treatments with my iPod, because that's how long ago it was, and to listen to music, because I couldn't even be alone for the 20 or 30 minutes that I was getting a treatment. And my doctor had said, you have to stop. Like, you have to stop this.
Mm.
And it's interesting the way I've always described that moment of realizing there's another way to live in the world, which is similar to what you said, was exhaling for the first time in my life. Like, oh, okay, here I am. And you've shown me a photo of what you looked like when you were in this transition. You had dyed black hair, like almost goth, can we say? Like,
I was not goth. I was a fashionista. I
oh,
was a
excuse me.
fashionista. I did some time in the fashion world, and it was, yeah, but I dyed my hair black for like 15 years
Yeah.
and I had very pale skin. So, the early desert years, it is a stark contrast to,
Yeah. It's interesting when you follow the path. I too look at old photos of myself and I'm like you're in there, so I can sort of see you. I can sort of see a glimmer. But like it was like covered with all these layers of other people's expectations or even your own of what it meant to fit in and succeed and follow the correct path of adulthood or whatever it may be.
right.
You mentioned the interior landscape, like tuning into that. So when you are effectively living a disconnected life, disconnected from your heart and your soul and your intended path, what did that feel like? Or did you use, like, what did you do to help you start to quiet the external noise and listen to what was going on?
Well, I really resonated with what you're saying with, needing like that music with you all the time, needing sound, some kind of distraction to fill the space, to fill the silence. I feel like that's how so much of us are. It's our normal reality, to just, this conditioning of needing to have something stimulating going all the time. And in the, in at some point in the midst of my 20s, I was aware, that I remember even when I was in college, I wouldn't want to park in the far lots of the college campus to go to classes, specifically because I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts for as long, because it would take longer to take the walk and I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. you know that was so clear to me. There was a lot of fear running in me, and then and I look back and I see some interesting things that happened that were kind of preparing me, for the desert. One made like major example relating to this incessant need for like music playing all the time, was that my car stereo broke at some point, and I was just like starving college artist type or whatever, and I didn't have the money to get it fixed right away. And it was so painful. I suffered,
Mm,
having to be in my car without music. And then at some point, like I just got used to it. It was wild. And so I just didn't never got it fixed. And I'm ever since then, and this is like mid 20s or something when this happened. And ever since then, like I am not accustomed to listening to music in the car anymore. So
mhm.
that was a wild like preparation moment. And I think my heart and my soul was so ready for the desert that once I came here, and I came here alone. I made this huge shift by myself again at a time when Joshua Tree was not the thriving community that it is now. And there was community then, but it was just way, way, way quieted down. The volume was way down, and so the first year, I would say, I was really alone, not knowing who my people were, where to find them, and but I think again, like my soul was craving that.
Mm-hmm.
And being so close to the land, because where I moved to was this tiny little homestead cabin out in the middle of nowhere, where, in Joshua Tree, it's not defined like that. Like there's plenty of places where there's neighbors and things around, but just the place that I chose to live in was exactly what I was picturing. And what I was picturing was a cabin out in the middle of the desert and with this big picture frame window where I could just sit and look out at the desert. And that's what I got. I didn't have neighbors. There was
Mm-hmm.
nobody around. It was very isolated. And being so connected to the land in that way without the distraction of anybody around. I didn't even have fences where I lived. And so it was very like spacious. And I felt this expansion taking place within me and this real ability and readiness to merge with the nature. And so I don't really think I struggled with how to adapt to like the silence that is the desert. And that's something I would observe in people who would come to visit from LA. Plenty of friends that would come out and visit from time to time, and to observe the struggle that people would have, just like almost like the silence was deafening, like
Mm-hmm.
very disturbing, like, oh, it's like too quiet.
It's the person who sits down to meditate the first time and expects their mind to go quiet, and it's
Right.
too busy to even sit for a minute. That
Yeah.
minute feels like eternity.
Yeah. And I really just sunk into that too. And I wasn't meditating before the desert, but it just naturally attuned to that. And so within a couple months, it's just like, well, I guess I should experiment with meditating. I was doing yoga, like I'd done yoga for a long time, but it wasn't from like a spiritual sort of
Mm-hmm.
perspective at all. It was just a practice. But yeah.
The space between realizing you wanted or needed to move, or maybe that wasn't even the full realization yet, but the recognition that life wasn't working for you and there was a place where it could work for you, that sort of 2 year span, sort of the liminal space in between. Were you actively like plotting a move? Like, how prepared were you to go make this pivot? Like, did you have work lined up? Like, it wasn't sort of the online space and that time frame that it is now, that you can live anywhere and no one would even know you'd moved. um,
Right.
so to your father's point, and we'll get to relationships shortly, like, what did you do for money? How did you manage the logistics, the realities of making that massive life shift?
Yeah, well, I would say in the 2 years prior to the move, before I met Joshua Tree, it was there was a readiness. Once the waking up started happening in me, it felt like, oh, I don't want to be in LA, and I feel like I've never seen the world. I was ready for a big move, and I was even ready to just go international, like real go big kind of thing. But Joshua Tree, being only a couple hours away from LA, didn't feel like a big move physically, but it was another planet, and so that's why there was the readiness in the heart for a big shift on that level, and, kind of leave everything behind sort of thing. And that included the work, because the only work that I had known at all was working for other people and
Mm-hmm.
being assistants to people, and not creating anything of my own. So when I leapt into Joshua Tree, it really was leaping into the unknown, which is what it is when you're following the heart. It's not mapped out. Like, once you follow your heart's guidance, this is what's going to happen, and this is how you're going to make your choices, and this is what's going to support you. And so it was just like, I just know I have to do this, and I have no plan. I don't have
Yeah.
a plan. And that's where the father figure gets very concerned. I'm very me. I've always, even when I wasn't in my truth, I was always me, like, still just like, okay, Angela's a little different. And my dad, very much a very typical sort of father figure, who just wanted to make sure I was, set and good, and he cared about that. So, I had no plan, but I trusted. And I did have one, like, what I did have was unemployment, because I did get laid off of the job that the last job that I had in LA, like kind of gave me the ability to do this and explore it without feeling stressed right away. And unemployment at that time in Joshua Tree, what it was at the time, it just meant I could be okay and not
Mm-hmm.
worry about having to work right away. And it was a huge blessing because I didn't know what I was going to do. And I didn't just arrive in the desert and suddenly, I see my life purpose and this is what I'm here to do. That
You
was a
didn't
process.
arrive from LA to Joshua Tree being like, I will be a shaman and heal
I
the
didn't
womb chakra, and
I
it
didn't even know
wasn't
what
on
a
the
shaman
plans.
I didn't know what a shaman was. I didn't know what a priestess was. No, I knew nothing. I knew nothing. And I knew that I knew nothing. And I came here with this openness and readiness to receive, whatever was going to like come into my path. I was just like, okay, I've been shut down and judgmental and narrow-minded for all these years and I'm just open now. But that time frame of not knowing, it was a blessing that the divine setup was that I could have this unemployment space, because otherwise I probably just would have ended up working at the health food stores. Who knows? But I was able to take it very seriously and stay very focused on my own work and taking care of myself. And what really paved the path for understanding my soul purpose was the fact that I had this deep care, this deep time frame of self care
Mm-hmm.
in ways that I'd never had before and never prioritized before. And these were things that I was starting to wake up to also within like the previous year or two from moving. I was starting to be interested in natural healing, and I had no physical anything, no conditions or anything, but there are things like the desert made it very clear. That's
Mm-hmm.
one of the beautiful things about the medicine of the desert is like it shows you where there's imbalances. And like hormones were off, my skin was not good, and that's just been something I'd struggled with. So it's just like minor things, but it was interesting because I came to the desert believing that I'm following my heart, but what I really am is an artist, and I was really caring about music at the time too. So I really just envisioned myself creating art and writing songs and singing. And that was actually probably one of the most pivotal intentions that brought me to the desert. The intention that I wanted to know what art I could make without anybody seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
That was really important to me. And I felt like that was kind of my original yearning to know who I was, came in that kind of way. Like, what do I create when it's not about showing it to other people?
Mm.
And so that was the original intention, had to do with creativity and art making. And that all happened, and I was doing that, but I was not expecting to have my time so focused on self-care
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to feed myself in a good way, to nourish myself. Because again, back then in Joshua Tree, there's like one restaurant, two restaurants, and that was kind of like the shocking contrast from living in a place like LA where the sky's the limit for food options. And I realized right away, like if I want a good meal, I have to learn how to make it myself. And that was just kind of the beginning of like, whoa, now I'm on a different kind of path. And I got really interested in whole foods, eating right away. It was very accelerated, this path of coming into food. Like things were just coming into my field left and right. And that's the other thing too, I would say about when you're really following your heart's truth, the indicator that you're on your path is that things really open up, and you're not trying to make it work. Like opportunities are coming in, information's coming in that supports like the next thing. And that's why I also, ended up finding the perfect cabin, and it all happened so fast because it was just like everything opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and anyway, so I started caring about, this path with food and understand learning, reading things about healing with food. And looking back too, I feel like maybe there was something I needed to heal physically. I just didn't know it. There might have been something that was starting to develop, and it was just pure guidance. It was like, you need to focus on this healing work, and I do believe that. And I'll never know like what that was or what it could have been because, I followed that guidance.
Yeah.
And it led me into this deep, deep relationship with food and self-care practices and yoga. Like I'd never done yoga before in very intentional ways, and being close to the land, getting nourishment and connection from being close with the desert every single day, doing yoga outside under the desert sun every day. And I came into learning about raw foods, which is something I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole before, just like the most unappealing thing in the world. And then suddenly I was just like, that sounds interesting, and I was pulled into this. And so I started eating all raw and exploring that. And that completely radically transformed my relationship to food forevermore after that.
Mm.
And I ate all raw for 2 years, like nothing cooked for 2 years. It was wild. And then in the midst of that is when I came into learning about the benefits of juicing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You like we were both very fortunate to be 28, have the Saturn return as you call it. And I've heard the phrase, but the way you said it, I had full body goosebumps. So I want to revisit that. It's a lot easier to do all of the things we both were able to do when you don't have a partner, dependence, mortgage, like all the quote
Right.
unquote grown up things. What happens? Is there another chance at the Saturn return for a mom in her mid 40s who realizes I've been on the wrong path? Like what does that person do?
Well, I mean, there is another Saturn return that comes.
When does it come? Am I in
uh,
it now?
no, I think it's age 56. It's basically like every 28 years.
Oh,
Every
interesting.
20 years. Yeah. There's always the thing I would say to that is there's always the opportunity to change your life,
Yeah.
and I think it's in our better interest to make those big changes when we feel it and we know it, through our own ability to initiate it on our own rather than waiting for the universe to turn our lives upside down,
Yes. Yeah.
which is very effective, but it can be way more painful of a process when
Yeah.
you're just waiting. But that's just what I would say is the opportunity is always there. And when there are those responsibilities and things that keep you feeling more tethered to your current reality, it's a lot more on the line. It's a lot more trust that you have to lean into. And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely honor the fact that there are people with those circumstances that make it feel way more challenging. But at the same time, even though that's not my story, there are a million people out
Yeah.
there who do have that story, who have still made that courageous pivot and taken the big leap of changing their life, even when there is a relationship, even when there are kids, and just, taking that leap together, and again, the universe, it supports you. You're supported in that.
Yeah. And it's just
Yeah.
gaining the evidence over and over and over again to trust it, that you're
Yeah.
in good hands.
Yeah.
At what point, how long were you in the desert, or did you ever even doubt that it could work? Like you're in this cabin. I was in that cabin. It's beautiful and special. And when we first came in and you had, your beautiful little pyramids of date pits and persimmon tops, and there was just this, like, every Josh and I would leave there being like, I just want to snuggle in and read a book in the corner. Like there's just this feeling in this space. Did you ever have a moment where you're like, what have I done? Like maybe there was a storm came through or a snake came through, and maybe one in the same, where you were like, that was crazy. What have I done? Why am I here?
No.
Mm.
No, I loved it all. I
Yeah.
loved it all. Once I was here, I never ever questioned going
Mm-hmm.
back. I
Mm-hmm.
never entertained it. That was never a
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
Again, because the alignment was
Yeah.
so strong and the medicine of the desert was so strong, and anything that would, and this doesn't mean anything was easy.
Yeah. Yes. And that's a great distinction. That's a really
Yeah.
important
And
distinction.
and also and following the heart and making these big leaps. And even when the support is coming in and the signs are there, like, okay, this is right. It doesn't mean that it's easy,
Yeah.
or that, there's still not initiations along the way. It's always about that. It's always about leaning more and more into trust.
Mm-hmm.
And, when we're evolving and continuing to expand our capacity and our experience, we're always stepping into new territory. So it requires that constant engagement with trust and those feelings of, feeling afraid of the unknown and just the mind coming into question. And for this particular circumstance, there really wasn't that for this greater big leap that I made, but not to say that I don't have that quite often with other heart-led decisions that I'm making. So it's definitely part of reality. It's for all, it's part of all of our realities. But, I loved those moments of being with the nature, like those, like there certainly were like huge, incredible storms that were like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And there were rattlesnakes and at the doorstep on many occasions. And all of it. And it was more like the heat, the summer heat, that was the biggest moment where you could question, like, what am I doing here? I learned to adapt and surrender to all of it. And I learned the beauty of all of it. I learned the beauty of the rattlesnakes. I learned the beauty of the insufferable desert heat. I found the magic in all of it, just in living in that way, just in total surrender to it.
You talked earlier about your father. And I know, well, I've recently learned you have a very loving relationship with your mom. What were those transitions like? Because I know from my own life, like a lot of relationships are lost or end or change when you reach the next part of the awakening journey, which never ends once it starts. Once the lights go on, they don't go off. They just sometimes change colors, get brighter, whatever it might be. What has been your experience, probably first initially with your move and the LA friends who came out and couldn't handle the silence, but then sort of ongoing as shifts have happened, as you've shifted, how that has been reflected in relationships with other people?
Well, I would definitely say it's easy to say that I haven't maintained any friendships from my LA life to, the desert life. And in the beginning, there were a lot of visits and, things like that. And it was exciting and novel, I guess, that Angela's now living in the desert. But 99% of them didn't, stay with me through the transformational process, because I was transforming. They were not. And not to say that they're not on their own journeys, but you know what I mean? It was just like I was on a very specific path of awakening, and rapidly, it was an accelerated process. And it's just part of it. You become a different person, and the things that resonated with you with other people, it's just part of the things that fall away. And it's not to say like that's the case for every single person, but just in my circumstance, I just was so not aligned with what mattered to me. And so the things that mattered to these friends, they didn't matter anymore to me.
Yeah.
And like the things that we had in common, they just weren't there. Like like I completely dissolved away. I really surrendered all that I was when I came to the desert. I just have this image of myself when I think about these earlier years in the desert, of just really being in the dirt of the desert, just like it came from being like the fashionista in LA to just, tattered clothes that were tattered because they were bleached by the sun, or, just I crawl through the desert and, get things stuck on cactus that would rip the clothes. Like it felt like that was my reality, and I loved it. And it was just like, I can't relate to these other things anymore. And there's one friend I will just have to say, there's one friend who also was on her path, her spiritual path of changing her life. And so she's my oldest friend at this point. So she's still in my life, but aside, most everyone else fell away. And and the relationship that changed with my dad, or the relationship with my dad definitely shifted as a result of this move, because he was so like deeply concerned and thought it was very unwise and impractical. And my call to come and make this choice for myself was the defining moment in my life, because it was the first time I didn't worry about what he thought of me. And that was a big deal just in terms of the dynamics of our relationship. And so within a year of my living there, like he'd come out to visit a few times, just kind of like, okay, like, do you have a rattlesnake bite kit? Like, I, I think he's still just kind of like, all right, like, what could he do kind of thing. But I was in the midst of my raw foods journey during this time frame, and learning how to make amazing raw desserts and everything.
You
And
made the best raw desserts in
I
the
know.
world.
I know.
Like the fairy dust. I don't know what you put in those cakes. I don't know, but we still long for the turmeric. Oh my goodness.
The
Something
golden milk.
special.
I
Yes.
know. They're legendary. It's true. But I hadn't come into juicing yet, and the raw desserts and cold pressed juices. This was pretty defining of who my identity started becoming in those earlier desert years. But before the juice came in, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and this is about almost a year into my first, year living in the desert. And I was so deep into this healing energetic space, and I had changed so much in that year that I just immediately, kind of threw myself into researching, natural healing for cancer. What are alternatives to chemo? And that's when I discovered the power of juicing.
Mm.
And, it was like the Gerson therapy that I was reading about. And I was just kind of like, wow, okay. And I just didn't care about juice. I was just like, no, you need the whole food. You don't,
Yeah.
that's not good for the body or whatever. But it totally, gave me this different perspective. And so it was really because of that I came into juicing. And, and I tried to give the information to my dad, and I'd sit him down to like watch these videos with me, and I gave him books, and he just was in so much fear, and it was so radically different from anything he knew that he just ended up going, through chemo. And and sadly he passed after 2 treatments and chemo.
Mm.
He passed, and it was a very short time frame. It was
Oh.
6 weeks from the time he was diagnosed to this passing. And so that was another pivotal moment in my journey of awakening and transformation. It opened up, the juice wasn't for him, but it was like inspired by him and inspired by this desire to help others. So it changed my life,
Mhm.
and I also would, it's important, I think, to mention that in that time frame is when I really, because of my father's death and leading up to that time where he was just increasingly in more pain and physically suffering, that I spontaneously activated my role as a priestess, as a healer,
Mm.
and held space for him in a way that I'd never had before. And it was a beautiful, beautiful gift and experience where I felt like, because of all of it, that I was able to understand who I really was for the first time. And it was witnessed by him, and he received it. I was able
Mm.
to be my priestess self,
Mhm.
taking him basically on this guided journey into his body to bring healing into his body, things like that I'd never done before.
Right.
It all was channeled in a moment. He received it, and it changed him. I think he
Mhm.
just saw me for the first time in my truth as I was experiencing it for myself for the first time. And, it was the most beautiful healing moment we had ever experienced. And it was because I was in my truth,
Mhm.
and so, it was just, that was the last time we had together. And after that, he couldn't speak anymore. And then he was gone. Um, and so it was months after that mourning process and grief, that I remembered about juice fasting and started that. And then that kind of that was another just clear alignment of all the series of all these events that was just like, okay, I want to do this. And that's, the opening of this, really the first thing that came in that made it clear, like, this is how, not only like what you're here to do is to help people heal, but in this really specific kind of way. It
Mhm.
started with juicing for people is the first real work I had out here in the desert. It was the first time I did anything that was kind of like my own business. I didn't come to the desert even wanting to start my own business. I was not of that mindset. I just knew I needed a different way than people usually operate. So it started with that.
You don't do juice anymore for other people. We can talk about
I
your
do.
fasts. So
Yeah.
when you made that decision, which is like a micro pivot in your journey because it created space for you to do other types of, I don't want to call it higher level healing, but more spiritual um, types of healing and guidance. What was that decision like, knowing that? And again, it's sort of removing another layer of a safety blanket, knowing that you had a business that people wanted of your cakes and juices. And then you said, no, I'm going to now do this other stuff that not everyone's going to understand.
The pull of the heart to just get more and more mysterious, more esoteric. Let's get more undefinable here. How can you?
I get your emails and I'm just like, all right, we're gonna do this now. Okay, I'm here for it.
Yeah, and it's just there was never really been a long game plan with anything that I've done up until I think I'm orienting a bit more that way now, but it's really just been about listening and
Mhm.
following my heart again and again and again, and recognizing that all this work with sacred food, and I would call it sacred nourishment, it was so deeply rewarding, and I knew that it was good. um, even just as of yesterday, I posted some flashback images of desserts that I'd made in years past, and I'm like, why did I do this? Because I'm just going to get a whole bunch of messages from people being like, this is the I miss those desserts so much, and yours are the best, and da, 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 and so people are still singing the praises. I got messages from a woman just like, me and my daughters like talk about how amazing your desserts were on a regular basis. And it's been years since I provided this.
I know I've counted each year that we don't get to have them when we're there.
I know, and it does make me sad that I can't do it all. But that's just kind of that you come to a point where it's just like, okay, well, this is actually quite a bit of work, and there's a choice to be made here, and this other thing is developing that I feel really inspired by, and it's focusing more on this priestess path. It's focusing more on developing as a spiritual healer and a teacher. And I don't know, there's just like multiple things that are of interest to me, many things that are of interest to me, and so it's been a curious journey on some level of like shifting from one thing to the next, but also and coming more into this ceremonial space that is really defining of my reality, because along the way of the juices and the dessert making and all of that and the raw foods, I came more and more into the greater awareness of the spirituality of it all, of the
Mhm.
sacredness of it all. And so it was happening. It wasn't like I just made a pivot from focusing on, being a source of food, like a food provider, to now I'm going to be a priestess. It was that already, and people would call me a juice priestess, and the very first ceremony I ever held was a juice ceremony, and that was just something I
Mm.
channeled that came through. I didn't even know like what cacao ceremony was, and that's became a big focus of my life during that time frame, where it was like easing out of the juices and all of that, because there was something else that was so clearly demanding my focus and attention. But I was holding ceremonies before I even knew what a cacao ceremony was, and so
That I was going to ask you about that, in that you guided your father through um, the his end of life, and then like, at what point did you feel like, I can do this, I can show up like this as this person now, outwardly, publicly, and I'm now equipped to guide people beyond juicing in any type of ceremony? Like, was there, people talk about the imposter syndrome, or, do I have enough experience yet to handle other people's emotions and situations that might come up if I guided them? Like, was there ever a hesitation or a pause between doing it for yourself or family versus, now this is who I am outwardly?
yeah, definitely, because again, even though we have these blessings of knowing what the heart is asking of us and where we're being guided into doesn't mean that it's easy to do those things necessarily. And so, that relationship of presenting myself in a specific way for the world to see has, I would say, continues to be a journey over the course of all these years. I'm being comfortable with that and feeling secure and strong in that. And definitely, I would say it took me years in the beginning to feel comfortable, but I was exploring it. And I really have to give myself a lot of credit for just leaping into a lot of these experiences and with a lot of trust, even if it didn't feel
Mm-hmm.
like I did, I could have done better, or maybe there's judgment that comes in through it all. Like, I just knew I was showing up for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so radically different. I grew up as a shy child. I was so quiet when I was young that my family tells me I was mute. I wanted to be at the back of the class. I didn't want to be called and I didn't want attention on me. And so to suddenly be in this reality where I'm in my truth, on my path, and I'm listening to guidance of what I'm here to do, it requires me to be guiding people through experiences, whether it's a one-on-one healing journey or like receiving divine guidance on behalf of someone, or leading a group through a ceremony, or taking a group of people to another country for a pilgrimage or something like that. It all requires me to be in charge, to
Yeah.
step into a role of leadership. And what I've come to understand about myself is that is my natural, authentic role. And I just was really asleep to that most of my life. And that I really thrive in that. So it was a difficult, I would say, a difficult process in the early years to really own that and feel comfortable in that within myself. But I continuously showed up for it. And for things like cacao ceremony, as an example, like I have, the people within my lineage, Paulo and Gustavo, who introduced me to cacao and, showed me the ways. And there's that. But like in terms like of a formal training, that came through guidance. I was guided by the spirit of cacao to hold ceremony for cacao for every new moon and every full moon for a year.
Mm.
And so that was my training, and it just came through like just you learn by doing it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was extraordinary. And so I maintained that and I honored that guidance for a year. And then that turned into 2 years. And then, there comes a point where you realize, oh, I can do this. I don't need to be nervous about this anymore.
Right.
Because everything that I do also, and that I've been sharing all these years, mostly is aren't uncharted territory, not just for me, but for most people. So it's not really like that there's been any particular person I've been able to look to and be like, oh, well, this is how they do it, so I'm going to do it this way. Like talk about a journey of following the heart, and just
Yeah.
trusting the unknown.
Yes. Yes, I understand that. And I think it's important to point out too the fact that the more you do it, the more whether you call it the divine wisdom or the whispers from the heart or a download, or you can open a book randomly and be like, that's what I needed to hear today. Like wherever you find the guidance, is that the more you follow it, the more you stack up confidence that that is a very valid direction to make decisions about your life, where it doesn't have to be the logical pro and con lists or following the path that someone else has set out before.
Right.
It's just sort of the
Exactly.
life experience has to flow for you to
Yeah.
trust it.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because the work that I've been called to share in service to others really has everything to do with, what we're talking about in terms of following the heart and
Mm.
trusting the heart. That's the foundation for everything that I'm offering, even though it takes these different forms and shapes over the years. It's all about accessing the truth of the heart. That's kind of the baseline energetic that is at the heart of everything I do. And with cacao specifically too, it's a heart opening medicine. And that's how I share it, is with this intention that cacao is going to help you receive, and connect with the truth of your heart. And we're in this time right now where so many people are waking up. And what the wake up is, I would say in a very general context, is that we're waking up to the reality that we're not we're not living our best life if we're trying to live from the mind. If we're trying to control things from the mind, we're in alignment with our path when we are in connection with our heart and following the truth of the heart. And so we're in a time of people learning how to do that. It's so much to deprogram from. And
Yes.
there's so much conditioning about, like, checking in with the pros and cons of any given situation. And it's just like, no, there's no pros and cons in the heart. It's just like
Yeah.
learning how to access that truth and to trust it.
Yeah.
That's the work that we're here to do now in this time.
Yeah. And I think what becomes so terrifying for people is that in order to do that, it also requires, in some cases, a complete shattering of a foundation of belief set, of fitting into a system of all these things that, we think is right or good or makes us good, believing certain ways. And it's just not true. It could be true for some, but there's no thing that's true for every human on the planet.
Right. Right.
Do you still struggle with decisions when you're like, okay, now you're going to do this? Like, you get that message and you're like, really, that's what I'm supposed to do now? Okay. Like, do you question the source?
Well, it's an interesting thing, intuition and guidance from the heart, because it's not definable.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a lot of my own personal uh, training over the years around how to access intuition versus the mind or some other voice coming in, and to really be able to make that distinction. And it's not easy, because we are complex humans, and there's so many layers. and sometimes the things that come in are big things. They're just like, the mind is going to come in and be like, do you really want to do that? Do you really think that that's the right thing to do, or the aligned thing to do? And the mind and the ego and all of that is set up for us to stay safe. And so the thoughts that are limiting are, and the ego that creates these doubts and self-questioning and self-criticisms, or whatever you want to call it, the mind and the ego, it's not like it's bad. There's nothing wrong with the ego. There's nothing wrong with having a mind that thinks thoughts. But it's all about keeping us safe, keeping us in our comfort zones. And it's all coming from a place of protecting us. So it's almost have a little compassion for your ego, because it's just, these negative thoughts and things, they're just really trying to keep you safe. So to have that awareness is very helpful. And then at the same time, it's like, okay, that's what's operating, is this mechanism to keep me small, to not take risks. Because as soon as you do something unknown, that's a risk. We don't know what's going to happen. And that's where the blocks come in, and the resistances come in, and the second guessing comes in. I absolutely experienced that. I am not a master of this on any level. And I honestly feel like I'm in a time frame right now that feels as significant of a time of change as was the beginning time of my life coming to the desert. And I
You
feel
and
like
me
there's
both.
some big,
You and me both.
I love it. I love it. It's so exciting. And then again, because I do feel more anchored into this life than I did
Mm-hmm.
coming into it. With everything so well established, it does feel like there's more at risk now.
Yeah.
And so I'm in the midst of it right now.
Yeah. And was this triggered by you needing to move?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so that perfect sacred temple of a cabin, I lived my life there for 12 years, and I had to leave. I didn't choose it. And the owner wanted her cabin back, and so wouldn't sell it to me or anything. And so 2 years ago, I was forced to leave, and at the same time, it was absolutely extraordinarily painful. It was
Mm-hmm.
the most heartbreaking experience of my life, because I have lived my whole life in solitude, and well, not in solitude, but on my own for the most part, and not being in partnership all these years in the desert, really in a solitary way for 12 years in that cabin. It was the best relationship I ever had. It was like the most long term. It was the longest relationship, the best relationship. And so to have to leave was extraordinarily painful. And I also knew in the depths of pain, like, I need this. I know that there's something bigger waiting for me, and I don't know what that is. And so I, have been through a process of grief around that, and adjusting to this whole new reality that that I know, is setting me up for something else. And so it's been 2 years of just kind of like, what is it? Because I still don't know what is it. But there's more clarity coming in now. But that was an extraordinary journey of having to let something go that I had really built a beautiful and sacred sanctuary there, and having to dismantle it and pack it all up, was setting me up for something that I'm still not sure about, because I still have most of my stuff in a storage unit from that move, and I've kind of been in this interim in between living situation ever since then. So I think that there's a lot there in terms of where I'm supposed to be, and a lot more inner work coming as a result of it all, and being in this process of really letting go of who it is I think I am again, because I had so much of my identity wrapped up in that reality and that lifestyle of being the high priestess in this solitary, remote desert life and whatnot, and very much able to see like, okay, I'm really attached to all of this. And even the desert being part of my identity is something that I need to be willing to let go.
It's to constantly be relearning how to be comfortable in that unknown space,
Yeah.
that in between. It's the hardest thing of all.
Yeah.
We're
Embracing
we're
the
on this, yeah. Because my shift too happened 2 years ago, where I
Interesting.
left. Yeah, I know, I know. I think we're the same age too. Um, but it's that thing where mine was my choice. Sometimes I think it's easier when it's not your choice, because you can't doubt or look back or say, well, what if, or could I've made it better, or could I've made it work, or whatever it might be. But it was an unshakable knowing that I had to go into the unknown and not have any clue. And I too witnessed what I was attached to in the last 2 years, and what really had to let go to move forward. And even when you land in a better place, it sucks. It's like, really, again, do I have to go through this again? It was so
Yeah.
comfortable. It was easy. I could do this. I knew what I was doing, but that's the process oftentimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I want to wrap up. Is there anything else you feel called to share that would make this feel complete for you?
Well, I mean, I think, we're at a good place of just present time in terms of
Mm-hmm.
everything that, is the story that has defined my transformation, the origins of it, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a cycle now of coming back to that same place. I think it's a beautiful place to wrap up, that it continues,
Yes.
like it never ends. And I think that's just a really important thing for all of us to remember and to know, that no matter how much we feel like we're in alignment and living in the truth of the heart, that the heart is such a realm of mystery and divinity, and there's nothing definable about what's happening in the heart space. And so the ability to follow the heart, and to learn how to do that, and to trust the heart's guidance, and to really embrace the unknown, it has to come with that willingness to let go of the things that you're happy you came into, and
Mm-hmm.
and to just keep trusting. I truly believe that this life journey, is all about finding our strength within the vulnerability, and there's so much vulnerability that comes from taking risks and entering the unknown. And it's, I don't think, I don't know that it ever gets easier necessarily, but it becomes more familiar. And so you're able to work with it, in different ways, when you understand the process and you understand what's being asked of you. And so it's like the more that we're able to do that, the more that we're able to really find the truth of our courage, you know. And courage for me really is about that ability to embrace the unknown and really surrender to the guidance of the heart.
That was beautifully said. Can you share, just before we go, what your offerings are now as we record this? You are guiding people through healing journeys in various ways. Do you want to just share a little bit about what you're up to?
Sure. Right now, I am available in private sessions. So I do healing work and guidance sessions with clients one-on-one. I also have an ongoing cacao ceremony monthly membership where we come together for every full moon remotely and take a journey, a heart-opening journey with cacao. I'm going to be offering a pilgrimage to Palenque, Mexico this fall, which isn't official yet, but the details will come soon. And so I'll be sharing that with my collaborator, Gustavo. And we've done this before and it was absolutely extraordinary. So I'm excited to return for the sacred pilgrimage again, something that I'm very excited about that isn't necessarily a way to work with me, but I am in the midst of completing a film that I've been making with an incredible little intimate team of creators. We've been working on it for almost 3 years now. And it's the story of what we are talking about here. And it's the story of leaving my cabin and the story of transformation that comes from following the heart. So keep an eye out for that. And if you're interested to know more about that, just stay on my mail or sign up for my mailing list. There's going to be more energy around that in the coming months.
Beautiful. And I'll share links to everything you've mentioned so people can find you. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for being my very first guest.
Such an honor to be the first guest.
I love you. I love you. I wish we were closer, but I'll be back in the desert for the annual visit in the spring, in the early spring.
And I love you so much. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you,
It's
Angela.
been wonderful.
Have a beautiful day.
Same to you. Many, many blessings to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in, for listening till the end. I want to invite you to check out the full show notes where you'll find links to all of the offerings Angela mentioned. Please get on her newsletter. You can get to the full show. The best place is probably my Substack at this point for full show notes. Also on meghantelpner.com, you will find it there. Please subscribe. If you love what you're hearing, want to continue this journey, we have loads more guests scheduled. I offer a solo episode for 2 to 3 week stretches, and then we have a guest. So we are finding our flow and our rhythm. Your reviews, your subscriptions to whatever place matters most to you, where you like to listen to it, is very helpful. Thank you once again for joining me for the Courageous Pivot podcast. I want to wish you a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day.